Welcome to Christian World News. I'm Mark Martin.
And I'm Heather Sells. We begin with a troubling trend for the church in China. Senior international correspondent and Christian World News host George Thomas visited China this week. He reports growing opposition to the gospel and anti-church activity that has not been seen for decades. Even though China is an officially communist nation, it has seen dramatic church growth in recent decades. Now the state is beginning to push back. And George joins us now by Skype. George, tell us, how is the government starting to crack down on the church?
Look, we began to see some of the rumblings of this crackdown probably about 4 years ago when local authorities in China's eastern province of Henan started to go into churches and begin to tear down crosses. Initially, the accusation against the church was that they didn't have the necessary building permit. They were not meeting the various building codes. And so they came in with their bulldozers and started taking down the crosses. Eventually, it spread to destroying of churches. But then it began to spread in several of the other more prominent southeastern provinces where there is a strong Christian population. But what we have seen, Heather, in the last 4 years has been an aggressive campaign by the Chinese government to go after people of all faiths, not just Christianity, Muslims, Buddhists. In essence, they have just in the last 24 months, they have released what's called a white paper, in essence, giving Chinese citizens the sort of blueprint of how they can and cannot practice their faith as it relates to the rules and regulations of the state. And what we have seen in the last 4 years has been a tremendous crackdown on all peoples of faith.
It sounds like this really made an impression on you on your just recent trip there. What were you seeing and why now?
Yeah, you know, I've been visiting China for the last 25 years, and I just came out of Beijing this week, and it was truly alarming because as someone who has documented the growth of religiosity in China for many, many decades, to see the country, in essence, turn its back on people of faith, specifically Christians and Muslims. It was very, very disconcerting. And those I have spoken to, leaders within the both the Muslim community as well as the Christian community, they are very, very concerned because in essence, what the Chinese government is saying is that you have to look at faith through the prism of communism, through the prism of the central government. Everything should be seen through that prism and worship of faith above the Communist Party, above the government, can get you into some very, very serious trouble.
George, how do you think this might play out for believers practically? Will it inhibit their movements? Might some of them begin to leave the country?
Well, what we have seen in recent months is that, we're not talking about the kind of persecution the church endured circa 40, 50 years ago. Back then, it was very, very severe. You had pastors who were imprisoned, tortured, killed. In this case, what we're seeing today is that you've got prominent so-called underground churches. The authorities come in and tell the pastor, listen, you cannot go outside of your home. You're restricted to your home. You cannot leave the country. You cannot leave the province or the city that you live in. And so the church understands they have a history of enduring persecution. What we're seeing today is that so many of the so-called underground churches that flourished in the last 25 years, pretty much since the opening of market reforms and the ushering of economic reforms by Deng Xiaoping, you are seeing today the underground church go back literally underground. They have, they used to maybe 300-400 people would gather on a Sunday morning, on a Saturday. Now that's not happening. Those 300-400 have broken up into very, very small groups. They're meeting in different homes, moving from place to place. So they understand this kind of lifestyle and what it means to live out their faith. Let me make a very, very clear point. It's not just Christians. Muslims today, for example, in Xinjiang province, all the way in the western hinterlands of China, where I have reported from in recent past, they are also suffering tremendously. The reports are numerous Western agencies say that close to about 1 million plus Muslims have been put into these so-called internment camps, where the government is, in essence, trying to brainwash these Muslims to abandon their faith, to not, for example, practice during
George, we've got to go, but thank you so much for your report, and it's a great alert. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome.